Вітання з прес-центру «Децентралізація». На календарі 2 грудня.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's the 2nd of December, and that's the time that we launch the dialogue called Drinkable Waters and Wastewater Management. The organization of the event is a decentralization portal, as well as the DESPRO project that has been in Ukraine for 13 years, and it dedicates most of its time to assisting the communities in Ukraine in water supply and sanitation. It has implemented more than 200 projects and built water piping. Sorry, there is no.
Мікрофон виключено. Деспро.
Коллеги, здравствуйте. Я начало не услышал, извините. Вениамин Ситов. Это меня касается, нет?
Ні, мікрофон виключено.
The speaker doesn't speak into the mic. I'm sorry. I cannot hear
Мікрофон
what the
виключено,
manager
організатора не
is
чути.
right. No input. I'm sorry. There is no input.
Включіть мікрофон. Колеги, хтось чує, не чує організаторів?
На жаль, дійсно немає звуку.
Коллеги, я вас слышу.
У нас, очевидно, немає зв'язку зі студією. Тобто всі, хто на зумі, ми тут всі...
Включили мікрофон. Я бачу, включили вже, слава Богу. Добре.
Тоді виключаємо наші.
Підкажіть, будь ласка, технічна служба, ми можемо продовжувати? Пані Оксано, будь ласка, продовжуйте.
Можна продовжити. Дякую. Дякую. Так от, повертаючись до того, що я вже сказала, досвід нашого проєкту ми закумулювали в аналітичному документі, який називається «Водопостачання та водовідведення у малих громадах. Напрямки змін». І назва документу, вона демонструє те, що можна і необхідно покращувати водопостачання і водовідведення в малих громадах, але не тільки з точки зору його технічного оснащення, але і з точки зору того, як має змінюватися політика і на місцевому, і на державному рівні, для того, щоб всі ці механізми працювали бездоганно і для того, щоб, власне, малі гравці на цьому полі відчували себе комфортно і захищено. Справа в тому, що у водному секторі необхідно комплексно покращувати, удосконалювати політику, як я вже сказала, і на місцевому, і на державному рівні. І тільки активний діалог гравців на кожному з цих рівнів, з кожного рівня влади, з кожного рівня технічної підтримки цих процесів, може допомогти досягненню дійсно успішного формування політики. Справа в тому, що документ, який наш проєкт підготовив, ми не розглядаємо як основу для такого діалогу, ми розглядаємо як наш внесок до цього діалогу, тому що він стосується тільки досить обмеженої сфери. Справа в тому, що проблема управління водними ресурсами – це та проблема, яка взагалі вимагає зараз підвищеної уваги з боку держави і вимагає більш такої активної і аналітики, і обговорення для того, щоб держава Україна прийшла до цивілізованих способів водокористування і управління водними ресурсами. Тому от ми, власне, і взяли цей наш документ підготовлений, і використали як привід до початку діалогу. Ми дуже раді, що сьогодні до діалогу долучаються люди із Міністерства регіонального розвитку, із громад, із експертного середовища. Тобто це буде такий дуже багаторівневий і цікавий з точки зору зближення позицій різних гравців у секторі. І я сподіваюся, що наша сьогоднішня перша зустріч започаткує серію подібних обговорень, які не тільки нам дозволять проаналізувати широко всі існуючі проблеми, але й дозволять почати шукати рішення в цій дуже непростій, але дуже важливій сфері життя держави і людей.
Дякую, пані Оксано. Оксана Гарнець, керівник швейцарсько-українського проекту «Підтримка децентралізації в Україні». Хто нас від початку не почув через технічні проблеми, ми говоримо про те, що починаємо діалог над тим, аби напрацювати реальні стратегічні кроки до того, щоб допомогти малим громадам вирішити їхні проблеми з водою. І переходимо до першого блоку нашого обговорення, назва якого звучить так: національна політика, пріоритети, інструменти, моніторинг. Я познайомлю вас з нашими спікерами. Ілона Постемська, координатор програм Посольства Швейцарії в Україні. Пані Ілона з нами на онлайн-зв'язку. Вітаємо вас, пані Ілоно. В'ячеслав Сороковський у нас в студії, експерт проекту ДИСПРО. Андрій Ведмідь, директор Департаменту комунальних послуг та комунального обслуговування Міністерства розвитку громад та територій. Валерій Кравченко, директор науково-дослідного та конструкторсько-технологічного інституту міського господарства, також з нами на онлайн-зв'язку. Володимир Білокінь, кандидат географічних наук, проектний менеджер зі сталого використання водних ресурсів команди підтримки реформ Міністерства захисту довкілля та природних ресурсів. Олександр Шкинь, директор Асоціації «Укрводоканал Екологія» онлайн. Євген Кунь, директор Товариства з обмеженою відповідальністю «Інтерпроект». І Юрій Забулока, голова Бузької територіальної громади, Миколаївська область. Вітаємо вас, наші гості. І я запрошую до слова пані Ілону Постемську, координатора програм координатора програм Посольства Швейцарії в Україні. Пані Ілоно, я знаю, що посольство також виступило ініціатором початку такого діалогу. Скажіть, будь ласка, чому виникла така ініціатива? Які настанови нам на сьогодні, на початку такого діалогу, можете дати? Будь ласка, пані Ілоно.
Щиро дякую, пані Надія. Шановні колеги, шановне товариство, усіх вітаю. І також від імені Посольства Швейцарії я б хотіла продовжити думку, яку вже неодноразово висловлювала пані Оксана. Найбільш ключове слово для сьогоднішнього заходу – це слово «діалог». І, власне, Швейцарія – це є країна, яка найактивніше долучається до діалогу, зокрема в питаннях питного водопостачання на усіх рівнях, починаючи з локального і завершуючи глобальним рівнем. Я, мабуть, хотіла б пояснити, чому така позиція Швейцарії в світі. По-перше, Швейцарія є з одним з найбільших резервів якісної питної води. Тобто, якщо брати в середньому по Європі, то за Швейцарією можна закріпити принаймні 5% від усіх запасів питної води. І відповідно в Швейцарії також дуже розвинені системи управління водними ресурсами і системами сталого водопостачання. Саме ці факти, що Швейцарія є дуже активним лобістом в доброму сенсі цього слова у просуванні водного порядку денного в світі. Саме Швейцарія дуже активно долучилася до перемовин на глобальному рівні. Цілі номер 6 – чиста вода та належні санітарні умови. Також Швейцарія є гравцем у просуванні водної дипломатії. В багатьох країнах світу існують конфлікти, існують суперечки щодо доступу до якісної води. І, відповідно, Швейцарія допомагає країнам налагодити сталі системи урядування в водному секторі, і це також допомагає в багатьох випадках розв'язувати конфлікти. Досить схожим підходом ми також користуємось в Україні, і вже протягом 5 років посольство Швейцарії підтримує підприємство «Вода Донбасу». Це єдине підприємство, яке досі працює на території усієї Донецької області. І, по суті, наразі є єдиним підприємством, яке зміцнює зв'язки між усією територією Донецької області і забезпечує усіх мешканців. Перепрошую, мабуть, відбувся певний збій. Саме це підприємство забезпечує якісною питною водою усіх мешканців Донецької області, як на підконтрольній території, так і на тимчасово окупованих територіях. І крім того, Швейцарія вже близько 13 років підтримує реалізацію проєкту ДЕСПРО, який є провідним проєктом саме за напрямком розбудови систем водопостачання в сільській місцевості. Завдяки потужній команді цього проєкту нам вдалося здійснити, можна сказати, революцію в багатьох громадах України, в наших пілотних регіонах. І ми розуміємо, що дійсно тисячі людей в Україні отримали нарешті якісне водопостачання в своїх громадах. Багато громад змогли зробити такий стрибок у своєму економічному розвитку завдяки появі якісного водопостачання в громадах. Але ми розуміємо, що для того, щоб зробити системні зміни, нам потрібен діалог з питань водопостачання на національному рівні. Тому, власне, сьогодні ми починаємо цей діалог. Тому будемо раді запросити вас всіх, взяти якомога найактивнішу участь в цьому, тому що вода потрібна нам усім. Дякую.
Дякуємо, пані Ілоно. Ваша посмішка нам подарувала ще більше.
Your smile actually improved our mood today and our sentiment in the group. Before I give the floor to our next speaker, I would like to read a comment on Facebook. Olga Floko. I understand that Olga is from Zhytomyr region because quite recently I saw her comment on the decentralization portal, and she said then, no water, no rural development. So she says that we don't have centralized water supplied and wells are too expensive to drill. So how can we live? In the autumn, our water basins were drained and we have now difficulty with water supply. I will give now the floor to Mr. Vyacheslav Sarakovsky, and he will present the information platform that the DESPRO project contributed to the dialogue. Vyacheslav, you've got 10 minutes for the presentation. And perhaps your presentation will be a response of sort to Olga's concerns. Good morning to everyone who cares about water supply development, and I'm inspired with what Ilona Pastemska has said. And I will tell you about the platforms that the DESPRO experts have developed so far. So you can read the text of the document that Oksana has characterized on our website, and we are open to fruitful discussion thereof. Being development partners, we are raising this issue and putting them up to the general discussion are several. First of all, the situation with water supplies is still problematic, and if we look at access to water supplies by rural and urban populations, we can see disproportions here, with 85% in the urban areas and only 30 in rural areas. And 96% of the population in the cities have got access to sanitation, and only 2 or 3% of the rural populations will have access to centralized sanitation. So there are very grave reasons. Then now the legal context is changing in Ukraine. The decentralization reform is underway, and we often hear that sectoral reforms should assist the decentralization reform and accompany. So with these two reasons in mind, we have initiated this dialogue to discuss our vision, first of all. I would like to look first and foremost at this public policy cycle, just analysis, formulation, implementation, monitoring, and assessment. Speaking about policy making, policy formulation, I would say that there's no uniform document with well-pronounced aims of reforms and policies in the area of WSS. We believe that Ukraine's engagement in SDG agenda could facilitate this policy formulation, but it hasn't happened yet. Ukraine hasn't used this opportunity, and even the concept of SDGs as access to safe management of drinking water, we are now speaking only about access to centralized water supply, which is not the same. Then another issue is the issue of brought water. You will know that 2.5% of the population of Ukraine who reside in east and south of Ukraine use tank water that is brought to their communities, and the state water agency is in charge of delivering this water, and the funding is allocated, but it is separate from other policy tools like the drinking water program. Since there is no result, we can be speaking about lack of coordination between these two agencies in actually developing well-coordinated policies, particularly considering the population or the residents that would be using delivered water or tankered water. Now, looking at the next stage in policy cycle, policy implementation. And here I would like to focus on policy tools, the state program drinking water, which is underfunded, grossly underfunded. There were several only years when it was fully funded. Thus, there is no result, and we can feel it particularly when it comes to the rural population. But is the underfunding the only problem? No, it isn't. Perhaps the priorities are not set wrongly. Perhaps the means of providing governmental assistance should be revised. We believe that this tool should be viewed through the prism of three principles. Just a moment. Can you show slide number 3, please? The three principles that you can see in your on your screens, equality, subsidiarity, and quality. When it comes to equality, we are speaking about equal access for smaller communities to the governmental support. We believe, and our experience proves that the current schemes are not effective because access through competitive or on competitive basis depends on the financial capacity to prepare the project proposal, protect their interests, and make their contribution or input to the project implementation. The communities with lower capacity can be left out, and it does not meet the SDG, according to which nobody should be left outside. And perhaps special targeted assistance should be given to communities most in need. Perhaps it's not a popular idea, but we believe that they can give positive result. The next principle is subsidiarity, and we believe that the responsibility for funding certain or objectives or tasks in the area of water supply should be divided between the three levels. For example, those which have environmental and social impact should be funded regionally, particularly when it comes to the tankered water, whereby communities will be in different conditions compared to other communities because they don't have the sustainable source of water supply. Just from regional budgets, the projects of the municipal significance should be funded, both in terms of water supply and sanitations. As far as the development of networks inside the community should be locally funded, including tariffs, investment programs, and lending. And here I would like to focus on the feasibility of transfer from non-refundable or non-repayable assistance to the repayable assistance. And then this mechanism can be used as well as in other countries with transitional economies or emerging markets. Poland, Hungary, for example, use budget loans that have to be repaid by the communities, but they then continue to operate. In Ukraine, at the regional level, there were several attempts to launch such a program, and I hope that later on one of the speakers will discuss it in greater detail. The next element of the policy cycle is about monitoring. And we believe that the national monitoring system does not allow Ukraine to measure its status quo. Without due measurement, there is no due management. And the annual thematic report in the SDG context shows that there is certain inconsistency amongst indicators. For example, we measure access to water supply through coverage of settlements. And the figures that I quoted at the beginning is about settlements. 99% of settlement, that is cities and towns, have centralized water supplies. But in global SDG agenda, it's about the population coverage. We do not have them in Ukraine, and we have to replace SDG indicators with our own national indicators. That might seem very lofty and very high level of discussion, but it affects the people in Ukraine. Then such a category of settlements as larger villages, they fall out of the division between the urban and rural population. Ukraine has committed under SDGs to integrate monitoring tools into the documents that it has. But statistical observation of the coverage of the population have not been in place in Ukraine since 2014. And we believe that this observation, this monitoring should be reinstated. Perhaps the tools of data collection should be revised, but the national statistics is a most important source of information. There's a national annual report, and it should also include the assessment of progress towards SDGs, and that will be easier than to introduce changes in the state statistics, because the Ministry of Developing Communities and Territories is in charge of this annual report. So it can focus on water supply and sanitation specifically in that annual report. So that's what I wanted to tell you from the point of view of public policies in this area. It's about formulating policy goals, policy implementation, and monitoring. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that our contribution will be valuable in the dialogue that we are launching today. Thank you very much, Vyacheslav. Olga Florko, thanks for our venting the concerns of hers. And Oksana Kolesnik is a very active respondent on our platform. She says it's difficult to imagine the scope of the tasks facing local communities. They won't cope with them on their own. I don't even know, Oksana writes, for how long or for how many years to come. Just the drinking water state program hasn't been funded for several years. It was revised back in 2011, as far as I can remember. And Vyacheslav has spoken about a possibility for repayable public assistance or state assistance to the communities, and about improving monitoring at the national level. And we've invited Andrei Vidmid from the Department of Municipal Services of the Ministry for Developing Communities and Territories of Ukraine. I know that you do conduct monitoring of the situation. Can you tell us what the communities can expect in this area? And do you think we will be able to start developing this strategy with regard to water supply and sanitation in local communities? Good morning. Our ministry has developed a concept that is being discussed by various ministries, and we hope it will be adopted very soon. And it leans very heavily on the ideas proposed by the DESPRO project, amongst others. And I do agree that there are a lot of challenges and issues in this area. One of those issues is that the territorial communities should initiate developments and changes within the communities, because if the national authorities initiated, then they should actually establish the rules. Yeah, the government does have to establish the rules and but the initiative should go from the grassroots. The community should be most interested in developing such projects, in building pipe water supplies in their own areas. And when it comes to water supply, the situation seems to be more or less understandable and popular amongst the population. But smaller communities do not appreciate the role of sanitation, and they would rather continue with the old practices. Communities do not pay due attention to the implementation of sanitation projects. The ministry, given the experience of the previous programs, will continue its strategic effort. We've developed the drinking water bill to be submitted to Parliament, and it proposes certain steps through 2027. And we hope that the funding will be restored, and we will work together to simplify requirements to the participants of this program. And we also will encourage both the water supply companies and the sanitation companies to participate in the state program. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vedmid. Oksana, who's our commentator on Facebook, said that she's from Cherkasy Oblast. Yeah, okay. We've started to speak about monitoring, and we now have Valery Kravchenko on Zoom connection with us. He is director of the Research Institute for Urban Economy, Municipal Economy. And before we start talking where to go from here, we need to know the state of the play. Do you think the monitoring exists? And if it is low quality, what are the barriers to improving the quality of the monitoring? Valery? Good morning. Morning. The situation is fairly peculiar in this country, in the sphere of water supply and sanitation. We've got monitoring tools in place, and we've got certain statistics, but when you start analyzing the data, you can see that there is no progress whatsoever. The data are not well coordinated. They are not historical. They are not consistent if we compare them year to year. But we look at either the previous years or the 2 previous years or the 5 previous years to demonstrate the change in indicators of water supply over a certain period of time. And the issue arises here, and we don't know how to address it for the national report to be complete and comprehensive and to be well evidenced. So we take these data pertaining to the population, we take them from regions, from oblasts, only from oblast state administrations. They prepare those data and they provide them to us. And the deputy governor or the governor signs the document with those statistical data. Then we verify them, of course. We work with relevant departments in the oblast administrations, and we've got the raw data that we can refer to. we've got specific problems with three regions: Donetsk Oblast, Lugansk Oblast, and Crimea. Crimea does not provide us with any data at all. But that actually might not be the problem, because the major number of settlements with the imported or tankered water are located in Crimea. And now you know that with this problem of drought in Crimea, the population there have huge problems with water supply. And Waters of Donbass, that enterprise that was mentioned, provides the data, the quality of which can be put to question, sometimes dubious. And they say that this enterprise consumes as much electricity as all other enterprises in that oblast. So, which I can doubt. Some time ago, we introduced the Water of Donbass program, and we used to monitor the situation. Yes, they've got this channel, but we have problems with the verification of those data. And the only institutions that collect data on water supplies in rural areas are oblast state administrations. There are certain administrations that do proper job, and some that do not collect data accurately. So quite recently, we took stock of villages with tankered water, and we did not comment on it in our national report for 2019, but you might have seen the draft national report for 2020, which is posted on the ministry's website. And you will see that there are certain settlements that are serviced by other ministries, like Ministry of Infrastructure, Ministry of Defense, and Penitentiary Service. So there are certain settlements where the residents get water from. So we asked the Ministry of Economy about the characteristics of water supply and sanitations in rural areas. And they said that they couldn't do that because they didn't have this information. Now, and when you start explaining it to the ministry that they used to have communal companies or enterprises, they respond that they don't have them anymore. And where raw data are collected is at oblast state administrations. And we can lean on their data when we develop or draft reports, national reports. You said that we've got a lack of information and the accuracy of those data. Can you think of any solutions to that problem? We have come up with the proposal several times to establish a new system of national monitoring. We also send those proposals to the Ministry of Statistics or the State Committee for Statistics, but they require payment for this service, and rural communities cannot afford. So we can see no progress whatsoever with either collection or improvement of the quality of statistical data. So we, as the ministry, together with the association, came up with certain proposals as to how to streamline this activity of data collection and quality improvement, but to no avail. Thank you very much. You've spoken about rural settlements with tankered water, and you spoke about the drinking water strategy and the new draft strategy. And I know that there are 730 settlements in Ukraine with tankered water delivered to those settlements. And I remember that in 2017 we used to have 834. Do I take it right that the number of such settlements has reduced over the years? Now we've got with us Mr. Volodymyr Bilakon. He's from the Reform Support Team from the Ministry of Environment. You've heard from your colleague from the Ministry of Developing Communities and Territories of Ukraine. You've heard Mr. Kravchenko, and from the prospect of your ministry, how can you comment on the challenges that they've commented on? Thank you. Good morning. I'll start with the discussion of the document presented by Mr. Sorokovsky and posted on the DISPRO website. I read it. I liked it because it is well accentuated. It is very clear in terms of defining aims and objectives of the program. And the reform support team in the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources started to develop the water policy development strategy through 2050 back in 2018. We sent this draft strategy to many participants of water processes and water policies, in particular to Minregion and to Watercanal and Water Ecology Agency. This draft strategy is a comprehensive document. It considers both water supply and sanitation, as well as some other aspects. And within that strategy, draft strategy, as well as within your policy document, there is a referral to SDGs, not only to SDG 6, but SDGs 14 and 15. And I believe that the draft strategy of water policy developed by our team requires revision and updating in view of the DISPRO policy document. I think it will be most useful to bring these two documents together and to find coordination amongst them. So water supply and sanitation is a problem, and within your policy proposal, policy paper, you speak about insufficient water supply to the population of Ukraine and very poor situation with the water bodies in Ukraine. And to us environmentalists, the water losses are amongst the most important issues. And I think that in addition to the environmental component of your document, we should also look at the economic component of this program. We know that in water pipes, water is also lost, and it entails certain economic losses because certain financial resources have been invested in water treatment with reagents, etc., and these resources are lost. unproductively. And we know that in some cities, such losses amount to 70%. In Denmark, for example, the water is the most expensive in Europe, up to 7 euros per cubic meter. But if the loss amounts to 10%, then these losses affect the water supplier. So they will have to refund those losses economic-wise. So, and the water losses from the sanitation systems and water waste wastewater discharges is of the most environmental concern, because they contaminate groundwaters that are very well connected with surface water. And we are now speaking about water contamination in general. So your policy paper, I believe, is very reasonable in terms of certain proposed institutional solutions and financial solutions. Mr. Sarakovsky has spoken about it. I would say the only downside of the document feels like this is a translated document. The original is English. So it is speaking about regional bodies or regional funds, which might not be quite clear to the Ukrainian reader. Some titles of the ministries are not quite correct, but it does not affect the quality of the document in general. As far as the monitoring is concerned, we understand that the responsibility should be clearly divided. Mr. Sarakovsky spoke about the actually certain confusion in distribution of responsibility between the ministries and certain agencies. But this responsibility should be clearly divided and clearly cut so that we know who should do what. And as far as the monitoring by our ministry is concerned and the water agency, so you will know that we've got a new procedure for water monitoring, which is in line with the framework directive. And we are now working to implement this resolution and with this procedure. And we are monitoring the quality and amount of waters that are the source for a centralized or any other distributed water supply. It is very important in the context of the problem with welling, with drilling wells for high quality water supply. And this work is underway, is in progress, and the State Water Agency, for example, has got 4 high quality labs that are in line with the Framework Water Directive, and they can actually measure all of the parameters that we find in that directive. And I'm sure that the Ministry for Developing Communities and Territories should be actually working with water canals to encourage them to conduct monitoring water supplies and sanitation with better quality. I would like to thank you for inviting me, and I would also like to thank the developers of this document for a high quality document or high quality policy paper. Thank you very much. Mr. Bilokon, I would ask you about the following. can the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, Minregion, and other agencies come together, sit around the table, and develop a well-coordinated mechanism for ensuring high quality of water supply and availability and accessibility of water everywhere? Thank you very much for your question. I see no problems with improving coordination across government and across agencies. We've got very friendly relations with Minregion and with Alexander Spin, who is present in this Zoom conference. Укрводоканал, Водоканал Экология, and Minregion cooperate very closely with us. And we are open to all strategic proposals, and we are ready to take them on board within the framework of this water policy strategy of Ukraine. And as I said before, this policy document can also be integrated in the overall water strategy of Ukraine. You don't have to lock us up in a room around the negotiation table for us to find common ground. I would rather speak about a certain socially oriented policy and a better communication with the population of Ukraine. Unfortunately, the social and environmental mentality of the population is very low when it comes to water use. Because water is a hostage of policies, particularly at the regional level, whereby decision makers would rather spend money and effort to repair the pipes that keep breaking, then develop some comprehensive policies. And as we said before, people do not understand the value of water. In Denmark, as I said, a cubic meter of water costs €7, but people understand why. They understand what the water supply and sanitation services are about and what they entail. And this socially oriented dialogue, awareness raising, communication campaigns, all of that should be focused on actually making it or bringing it home to the people that water is an extremely valuable resource. We speak about high price of natural gas or electricity, but we undervalue water. We understand that our population is poor, but we should raise awareness of Ukrainians about the actually price of water. Now I will give the floor to Alexander Shkin, his director of Укрводоканал Экология Association. You represent a very powerful association that brings together several border canals companies. And we understand that there are certain problems with water supply management and management of the networks of water supply. Now that we've got newly established territorial communities, they might face problems when they establish their own utility companies in the area of water supply and sanitation. Does your association see itself as a provider of assistance to smaller водоканals and territorial communities? Good morning, dear colleagues. I'm glad to see all of you. It's very difficult to address all of the issues within 10 minutes, and I will focus on the major problems, particularly on the strategic ones. 2 years ago,
розвитку, політична
association
пропозиція, яка має бути
initiated
прийнята
the
найближчим
concept
часом.
of
І
water
зараз Мінрегіон
development,
дуже
and
активізувався в
now
цьому плані,
the
тож має бути офіційний документ.
Minregio region is
З
working very
Володимиром Миколаївичем
closely with
Білоконем ми
that.
працюємо вже
With
там пару років. Ми навіть
we worked
призупинили,
with
якщо можна так
Mr.
сказати, затвердження їхньої
Bilokon
стратегії,
for
тому що
some
ми сказали, що
time
всередині загальної
on this
стратегії,
strategy,
якою
and
займається
we
Мінприрода,
agreed
повинна
that
бути наша. Тому що без цього, скажімо так, без такого великого напрямку неможливо розвиток всієї стратегії. І в цьому плані ми теж працюємо.
Incorporation of our
на сьогодні
ideas,
технічне
the
завдання на
development
її
of the
розроблення.
strategy is
Є рішення тендерного
impossible.
комітету Мінрегіону
And
про
now there is
закупку
the decision
такої
of
послуги
tender
розробки
committee of
стратегії, хоча вона
Minregion
була зроблена в 2002
to
році.
contract the drafting of this strategy.
Петерсон її там
And
очолював цей напрямок, з ними зустрічалися, дуже добре
we met
розроблено.
with the
Частково
team of the
реалізовано, треба
drafters
поновити,
some
звичайно,
time
писати
ago, and now we
загальнодержавну
have to update it and
Проблеми,
develop the
наша
national
асоціація
strategy.
займається
Our association
все-таки більшим водоканалом. Всього у нас в Україні десь 2,5
works with
тисячі
vodocanals.
підприємств, які
We
надають
have
послуги з
more
водопостачання,
than
700
1,000
централізовано, 140
suppliers
підприємств,
of
це 30 тисяч
water,
більше населення і 100
to
тисяч більше це ліцензіати Національної комісії. До нас до асоціації входить 160 цього
we have
підприємства з бізнесом,
160
але вони надають послуги
enterprises in
десь
the association.
70%
We provide services to
послуг в Україні.
70%
Проблеми в
of
великих і
the
малих підприємств вони
consumers. The
схожі.
problem
І
of
вирішення їх
large
має
and small
відбуватися
enterprises
якимись
are
там
very similar,
загальними
and they
документами.
should be addressed
У
with
нас
the
є
national
багато пропозицій
strategy.
із конкретикою,
We
з
have
розрахунками,
developed
скільки
several
потрібно коштів,
proposals with
скільки
the
потрібно, які напрямки
budgeting
потрібно врегулювати,
proposals
як в законодавчому
and
плані, так в плані
legislative
фінансовому, так і в
proposals
плані
as well.
моніторингу, про який ми казали.
So,
По розрахункам не тільки нашим, для
our
того, щоб підприємство
calculations
більш-менш привести
are
в такий
about
вигляд, хоча б так, як у Польщі, потрібно
bringing,
біля $1000 на одну людину. Це $1 мільярд 200 мільйонів гривень. Це, ви розумієте, це ті цифри, які навіть не вкладаються в голові. Але з іншого боку, це можна зробити поступово, тому що в Україні не зможемо такі кошти залучити з усіх джерел, які не було, тому що цифри величезні. Але є приклади інших країн, правда, країни, які доєдналися до Європейського Союзу, вони отримали досить такі серйозні гранти з цього приводу. Але у нас є пропозиції державної підтримки, якраз розвитку всіх підприємств, не тільки великих підприємств, які мають бути
large
враховані
enterprises, and those
знову ж таки
proposals
концепції,
should
стратегії.
be
І це
taken
не
on
програма
board
«Питна
in
вода»
the
в тому
draft
вигляді, яка
strategy.
вона
It's
була,
not
яка вона є.
the
Дійсно,
drinking water
Мінрегіоном
program as
розроблена
it is.
програма
Minregion
«Питна вода» на 28
develop
мільярдів гривень, яка на 5
drinking
років,
water
але, звичайно, такі
program for
кошти
5 years with 27 billion
Тому потрібно
worth
створити умови. Ми
of
запропонували умови залучення
investment,
дешевих
but
кредитів
it's not
Світового
quite
банку.
realistic.
Вони
And
зараз
we
ідуть під
now are
1%
negotiating
річних,
the
як
water
би там не
bank
було. Це валюті, але
loans
держава
with
повинна
1%
створити
interest rate.
групи
But
підтримки
the government
реалізації
should
таких
set
проєктів по
up
регіонам.
support
Це
groups
мають
in
бути
different regions.
регіональні групи.
And these should be
Має бути
regional groups, as I
підтримка
said,
в зменшенні
and
або
support
погашенні
should be given to
ставок кредитних по цим
reduce
проектам за рахунок
the
держави. Ще деякі напрямки.
interest rate
Стимулювати підприємства
against
для
the
розвитку і для
governmental
залучення в
loans.
тому рахунку і місцевих бюджетів,
And
і в
we
тому
should
рахунку
work together
вся
with local
весь світ живе якраз
communities
за
in
рахунок
terms
залучення,
of
як це не було,
attracting
цих кредитів.
local
Ми порахували, що
funds.
за 20 років можна
Over the
реалізувати
20
10
years, we
мільярдів
will be
євро,
able to
які мінімально
implement
необхідні на сьогодні.
projects
При цьому
worth 10 billion
навантаження на
euros.
тариф,
And
дійсно,
the,
вона збільшиться в 3 рази.
Loading
В цьому
on
випадку.
tariffs
Така
will
цифра
increase
начебто дуже велика. А
threefold.
якщо порівняти
It looks
тарифи на
very
інші
big a
послуги, які
figure, but
отримує
if
населення,
we compare it with the tariffs for
скажімо, на
other
сьогодні вартість
services,
ціни на газ,
for
вона така,
example,
як середньоєвропейська,
natural gas is
вартість ціни на
tantamount to
електроенергію по
the
населенню.
average in Ukraine.
Вартість ціни на електроенергію десь
the
1,5 рази нижче
electricity
всього
is
ніж є середньоєвропейська. Вартість на теплову енергію на
50% lower
20%
than
нижче, ніж
the average in Europe.
вартість на наші послуги
the,
5-6 разів. Тобто,
Price
як
of
можна в
our
політично
services
заангажованому
is 5
середовищі
or 6 times as
роз'яснити
low
про те, що
as
200
average
гривень на
in
одну
Europe.
особу
So 200
на сім'ю з трьох
per
чоловік
household
це
of
занадто
3
великі кошти для того,
is
щоб мати
not
постійно
too much.
водопостачання та водовідведення. Але це
It
все так
comes to
загальні
water
фрази.
supply
Є
and
конкретні питання,
sanitation. And there are
ті, які
certain specific
потрібно
issues
нагально
that we
вирішити, і
need
асоціація
to
цього до
address
цього долучається.
immediately.
Це
And the
регулювання за
association
законодавчим
participates in
регулювання
that.
закону про
It's
житлово-комунальні
the
послуги, про
legislative
публічні договори, про оцінки і так
regulation
далі,
of
яке вже 2
the
роки
utility
ніяк не може прийнятися, і
services.
підприємства взагалі працюють всі поза правовим
And
полем. Ми не
most of
маємо
our
навіть права
enterprises
застосовувати ті тарифи,
work
і працюють по
without
тарифам
this
2018
legislative
року.
regulation,
Це
and we
закони,
cannot
які
use
ініційовані
even
нашим
tariffs of
урядом про те, що
2018.
екологічний податок має
And the
збільшитися 10 років 10
environmental
разів.
tax
І через
should
10 років
be
цей
increased
тільки один податок буде
tenfold
складати
in 10 years, and
6-8%
it
валового
will
доходу,
amount
що
to
фактично на
6
сьогодні
to
дорівнює амортизації
8%
або всім
of the
інвестиційним
annual
можливостям підприємства.
income.
Питання, яке стосується
The
якраз
issues
моніторингу, питання
relating to the
забезпечення якості
monitoring
води. Це питання
of
номер 1,
quality, and
питання
that's
так
number
званого
one
Санпіну,
issue
державних санітарних норм, які
of the
регламентують
state
якість води,
sanitary
яка
norms
має
that regulate
постачатись
the quality of
підприємствами
water to be
водопостачання
supplied
всіми централізованими та
by
децентралізованими
centralized water suppliers.
Санпін на сьогодні орієнтований на європейську
These
директиву.
norms
Європейська директива
are
питна вода,
in
і ці
line
директиви
with
прописані
the
такі вимоги
European
якості, які може
drinking
собі
water
дозволити, мабуть,
directive,
що це
and
звичайне питання за
they
7 євро.
are
Як
about
ми
the
можемо
quality
дозволити
of
за
water
60
that can
євроцентів
be
такі ж самі
insured
послуги, і
in
вже ми повинні
Switzerland.
були їх
But you should
забезпечити з
remember
1
that
січня цього року.
the
Нам вдалося
cubic
перенести на 2
meter, one
роки.
cubic
Ми
meter there
зібрали
costs
за нашою
7
ініціативою
euros, whereas we
наказом
have
Мінрегіону
0.6
робочу групу з
euros per
30
cubic
осіб, з них
meter.
половина це
We have the
представники
working
медичної
group of
науки. Для
60
того, щоб пояснити
people,
Міністерство охорони здоров'я,
and we
яке не хоче слухати
half of
взагалі,
them are
що ми маємо
medical
воду
doctors, the medical
такої трохи
professionals. And we
по
had
деяким
to
показникам, по
explain it to
індикаторним
them that
показникам, як це
the
вимагає
quality
директива,
and some
вони можуть виділятися,
indicators of
каламутність,
water
скажімо
are
так, кольоровість і так далі. Для того,
very
щоб це виконати, потрібно
different in
мінімум
Ukraine
5
from
мільярдів євро.
the requirements of
Ми
the
над цим
directive.
документом
And in
працюємо. В
order
цьому
to meet
документі
those
також
requirements,
передбачений моніторинг.
we need at
Моніторинг,
least
технічний
5
моніторинг
billion
якості води.
euros.
Це складний
Now we
процес,
conduct
який на
technical
сьогодні
monitoring
може
of water
забезпечити
quality, and it is a
одиниці
technically
лабораторії, і то не
complex
всі показники, які
process
вимагає
that
цей Санпін.
cannot
Якщо у
be
Мінприроди є там 4 лабораторії на
guaranteed
всю
by
Україну, які
technical
моніторять
labs in
поверхневий
Ukraine.
воду,
We
то в нас
only
повинні
have 4
такі ж самі
labs
моніторинг
monitoring surface
забезпечити кожен
water, and
водоканал.
now we
Тому рахунки
need
маленькі. Це
as
нонсенс
many
взагалі.
labs
І,
to
на
ensure
жаль,
technical
Міністерство
water
охорони здоров'я такий
monitoring.
дуже важкий діалог.
Unfortunately, the
Ми залучили
Ministry
до
of
цього
Public
РНБО там і
Health
так далі.
is not
Я думаю, що
quite
це питання вирішено, щоб не
ready to
нав'язувати таких
cooperate.
питань, які не можна виконати.
Thank you very
Так.
much, Mr. Shkin. So we need to invite yet another ministry to the monitoring on water quality. Right, and now we have Yevgen Kunyu with us. He's director of limited liability company Interproject. Yevgen, good morning. You represent business, and business usually says that it is all for modernization, for innovation, but it takes money, and I cannot even imagine how local communities could cope with modernization and innovations. So what do you think your assistance can be to the communities in this regard? Thank you very much. I would like to greet all of the people who I know and who we usually meet during these public discussions. So we've got, we as businesses have got two issues. One, we're in the cities where the supply is better, and villages and other rural settlements with poorer quality of water supply. But ineffective enterprises actually take the public money but never provide the quality of the supplies. In villages, we have to do all of that from scratch. We tend to discuss a lot various topics relating to water supply and sanitation. Particularly, civil servants write a lot of documents with no intention to implement them. Some time ago, we had collective farms. And I would compare water canals to old collective farms. 20 years ago, they collapsed. Now they are not effective at all. But some of them transferred into agrarian enterprises, and they are now using new machinery on the fields, and they can export produce. But now water canals have found themselves in a very similar situation. Lots of talking, very little of doing. So we should ensure competition, business competition in this area, not for the utility companies, state-owned utility companies to participate in the market. Indeed, there is the national level where legislation should be improved, regional and local levels, and at each of them, certain decisions should be taken. But when decisions are made, they should be discussed broadly, and some of the decisions should not be popular. We understand that, but that's the only way out of this situation. We know of many concepts and strategies, but they have never worked well. Yes, you say that utilities companies should be replaced by private businesses. Let us look at a small local community. Business comes there, they develop the networks, and they start providing services. Do you think that people will enjoy high quality services in this case, even if they raise tariffs to 100 hryvnias per cubic meter? You should be finding some fine balance. Yes, we should be looking for such balance, but nobody has even started to look for such a balance. Ukrainian government treats businesses badly, particularly in the utility economy, municipal economy. Utility companies are actually subsidized. Thus, private businesses are not competitive with those enterprises. Private businesses should get credit, should invest it, and then have to repay the credit and make some profit. So we understand that we are better organized, we have better business processes, and I believe that Ukraine should strategically make it possible for businesses to enter this market and to replace utility companies. Thank you very much, Evgen. I will give the floor to Yuri Zavoloka from Buska local community. Yuri, can you hear us? Yuri Zavoloka, yes, I can. I think we should have started with you because you know best of all those issues with water supplies in rural communities, particularly in Mykolaiv Oblast. In your own community, you have certain settlements that still use tankered water. And I know that you have started to address this issue. Can you tell us about your practices? How did you manage to improve water supplies? And who supported you in that? I've listened to the invited experts today, and I've been amazed because when we come to the quantitative indicators of water supply, it's okay. You compare some values or prices like 7 euros per cubic meter in Denmark, it's okay. But if you can compare the payability or purchasing capacity of the population, you will see huge gaps, because we have the price of the cubic meter of water at 27 hryvnias, and we as local self-government are doing our best to improve the quality of supplied water. but the rural population is fairly poor. So you use water for their everyday needs, but they also use it to irrigate their their gardens and their land plots, and where we have drinking water of good quality, but in the summertime and in the early autumn time, they consume much more water, but we've got a very limited capacity. We have certain reserves of water that we can supply. Just subsidies to municipal utility enterprises or utility companies, or we can subsidize them only to their fixed assets. Just we cannot affect salaries or anything like this. On the other hand, we face a problem of those companies having very low incomes. Some time ago, we had problems with water supply in remote settlements, but now, once we form territorial communities, some settlements will be having wells of 150-meter deep. But I haven't got the data on geological situations there and there where the wells have drinking water or not. So what do we do with those wells that are already there? Shall we actually deepen them and spend money? But where's the guarantee that we will find water at a deeper horizon? And there are some settlements that are far away from water wells, and their price of water is 30 to 50 hryvnias per cubic meter. So they need to get tanked water, which is also fairly expensive. Private companies do not seem interested in providing tanked water either. So it is fairly difficult for us to find high quality water. We drilled a well of 110 meters. We found water, but it was not drinking water. And at 170, we found drinking water of 5 cubic meters. But for our settlements this large, it won't be enough. At other levels, we see that water is contaminated and we won't be able to supply it as drinking water. So we have to arrange long water pipe networks, establish them locally, and we have to cooperate with the government. We have to actually develop certain projects for the competition under the drinking water program. And the cost of this project can be 20 to 30 million hryvnias. For local communities, it's not affordable. But we have to develop those project proposals. We have to get them approved at the oblast or national level. But the bidding documentation will be very expensive to draw. It will be about $1.5 million. And thus you face lots of different financial issues. So there are some wells with 10 cubic meters and the settlement of 900 people, and they will have the school of 150 children. They also use water. For us to develop the technical specifications and bidding documentation, we need to take all of that into account. Besides, we should guarantee that this project will be implemented within 2 years, but that's most unlikely. And local self-governments will not be able to allocate the major part of its budget to address the issue of developing such bidding documentation. We understand that water supply is an acute issue, but utility companies that ensure water supply cannot use our money to pay salaries, as I said. And decisions are made not only by the top management of the local communities, but by the entire communities. We understand that businesses will come only where they can be profitable. But can we guarantee that they are profitable in our localities? Since, as I said before, these projects are very, very expensive. And I conducted some research about purification or treatment of surface water, but I was told that it will be even more expensive than drilling wells. Now, with the climate change in place and the level of waters in water bodies falling down, we also have this issue of water supplied. Just wastewater treatment remains the problem. All the networks are obsolete, and the wear and tear is huge. The quality of water after treatment is very low, and it cannot be sold to the population as drinking water. Yes, thank you, Yuri. So this ends the discussion of the first block of this dialogue, national policy priorities, tools, and monitoring. And we still have Andriy Vidmid from the Ministry for Developing Communities and Territories. So I will give the floor to you to make some conclusions. I would say it's too early to make conclusions because we heard mostly emotional responses to the presentations. We understand that businesses would face challenges to make their investment repaid soon. And we heard from the local communities, and they say that sanitation is still a huge problem since it's not in place. Sanitation facilities are not in place, and this entails the contamination of surface water. And they, again, hope that the national government will help them in that, but they do not make any steps to encourage individual households to contribute to better sanitation and wastewater treatment. We understand that this is a huge issue, but we hope that local communities will show more initiatives. We won't be able to establish separate rules for separate communities, but we can develop rules of the game that will take on board interests of as many communities as possible. So with this, I would like to thank Mr. Vidmid and Mr. Sorokovsky for their contribution to the discussion of the first block of issues. Our second thematic block is state as a regulator of activities of enterprises of water supply. Andriy Kavun from DESPER project, Andriy Pinchuk from Novo Alexandrivska territorial community. Mykola Timchenko, he's director of the utilities company Tlumach Common Service. Ivan Belbas, expert on water supply and sanitation. Veniamin Sitov, Merifianska territorial community and member of the Association of Amalgamated Territorial Communities, and Maria Zonova from Vinnytsia Oblast State Administration. Andriy, my first question will be to you as representative of the DESPRO project. You deal in the development of utilities companies in smaller communities. And over these years, you've faced a lot of regulatory or witnessed a lot of regulatory challenges that local communities face. So how should those challenges be addressed? Thank you, Nadia, for the introduction. In our second block, we would like to present some of the materials that DESPRO has developed to remove regulatory barriers to the development of water supply and sanitation services, particularly in rural areas. We've got some experience and expertise in this area. We implemented more than 150 projects of water supply in rural communities. And I would like to focus here, speaking about water supplies, about the legal status of the service providers. According to the drinking water supply and sanitation law of Ukraine, water supply services are delivered by water suppliers, and it is impossible to get those services otherwise. So direct management, whereby community itself participates in this, is still impossible. But these practices are common in Switzerland, for example. In Poland, most settlements actually manage their own water supply and sanitation services through direct management. It is a very effective mechanism, and it could improve the situation with water supply services in local communities. The other issue is licensing. Why so? Because there is no other mechanism to certify qualification of the service provider. So smaller operators face problems here because license terms are fairly difficult, and the manager of such companies should have higher education and have experience in this area of several years. That is, again, next to impossible to comply with in smaller communities. And the operators that provide services to settlements of 5 to 10,000 residents should be changed from licensing to certification. And certification will harmoniously complement the element of a direct management that I mentioned before, when the service is managed safely by the community itself. So that's what we lack today in rural communities. Another important issue is taxation, and it is about the single tax and VAT. Most of the rural settlements are serviced by rural utilities companies that cannot pay single tax under the tax code. And it is a huge issue because it complicates their tax administering and tax accounting, and they pay VAT on common grounds. And we believe that this norm should be changed so that utility companies pay single tax. What will it allow to do? First of all, it will simplify their tax accounting and companies that have the turnover of 1 million within the calendar year should be registered as VAT payers. And now utility companies are trying to evade this tax. They will be dividing their enterprises not to pay VAT. So that their turnover does not exceed 1 million hryvnias. So we believe that the application of the simplified taxation system could address this issue and make the life of small enterprises easier. And 7 million hryvnias would be quite enough as a turnover to smaller utility companies. As far as VAT is concerned, it's not only about smaller vodokanals, but also about larger enterprises. In Poland, for example, a VAT rate is 23%, but for water suppliers, it's 19%. And in Germany, it's 17%. So we shall also revise VAT rates so that more money stays within this sector to improve the networks. And design norms are too tough. We believe, for example, the norm about the daily consumption of water, which is 200 liters per day, it is too high. The research that DISPRO conducted, and according to the practice of the implementing projects in rural communities, we can say that the consumption is 50 to 100 liters per person per day, which is much lower than the established norm. And that allows to make projects and design actually less expensive both in building and maintenance. And fire safety norms should also be revised and streamlined because sometimes these fire safety norms are too tough, and because of them we have to either postpone the project implementation or to look for additional funding. Certain compromise should be found here. With sanitation, when water supply systems are designed, they should also take care of wastewater discharges. And communities are trying to be very inventive. They actually say that they will design water supplies, but sanitation will be approached or treated separately. We understand that sanitation networks are a challenge, non-affordable for the local communities. Sanitation is much more expensive than water supply. Sanitation is 3 to 5 times as expensive as water supply, and communities are not prepared to take decisions to ensure sanitation networks. And the population would not agree with the high tariffs here. So when the population do not feel any pressures borne to bear on them by the local authorities or neighboring communities, they choose not to care and actually not to establish sanitation networks. So we believe that households that have technical capacity to establish sanitation, they should be obligated to connect to sanitation networks. Without that, it will be very difficult to ensure a proper sanitation in the communities. And if local governments state that they will be using individual solutions, then they should be monitoring those individual solutions. They should be empowered to actually impact local or individual households in checking whether they are connected to sanitation networks. And there is no strategic document of higher level on planning centralized sanitation networks that will be financially sustainable and perhaps paying due attention to individual solutions, to encouraging those individual solutions to be implemented. And the mechanism of simplifying standards for individual solutions compared to centralized sanitation can also be proposed. This will improve the situation. And the change in the attitude of rural population to sanitation should be achieved through awareness raising, through social work, through education and better communication. So local governments have a lot to do in this respect to promote individual solutions. Thank you very much, Andrei. So I understand that the population is not always prepared to pay for these services. I know an example of a community that actually had a very well designed the system of solid waste management, but when they looked at the tariffs, they refused to pay them. Now I'm looking at Andrei Pinchuk. He is the head of Novo-Alexandrovska territorial community. You established the new system of water supply. How much did it cost you? Is it true that it changes the quality of life in the community? We started with 10% of the residents having access to 24/7 access to water supply. Other people didn't have this service available. Some brought water from other settlements, like tankered water. Some people would use thaw water. My children in the summertime actually wash themselves in the river. And it was a standard for us to get piped water supply once in 30 days, once in 60 days for several hours without a very strict actually schedule even. So I can tell you that we used to have people, particularly older people, who would just have buckets of the river water in their homes, and they will boil it and use it for their consumption. That was a tragedy that in the 21st century, people living in 20 kilometers from the oblast center would have no access to piped water. So we spent 32 million hryvnias to establish the water supply system. Now 100% of our residents have access to drinking water. And I would like to thank Despro specifically for assistance and for developing our utilities company, which was co-funded by Oblast Council, by the Village Council. And the Village Council, by the way, ranks fourth in terms of investment in water reform. And the population also participated in co-funding. They invested more than 4 million hryvnias. Every household contributed 2,000 to 8,000 hryvnias to this water reform. Now, every resident of our settlement is proud of this contribution. And when we discussed price of water supply, we conducted public hearings. In one village, 100% supported the increase in tariffs. In other two, 180% of the residents agreed that tariffs should be increased. So this reform was painful, I would say, emotionally difficult, because people seemed to be frustrated and disillusioned. However, there are certain things that the national authorities could change for such reforms to be facilitated and conducted in a larger number of settlements. By the way, our utilities company did not get any subsidies from the village councils, either direct or indirect, and they are profit making. And it is yet another victory in a smaller rural community, that you can make this service profit making rather than loss making, profitable rather than profit making. And every tariff setting by local authorities will be politically motivated. There should be a certain national regulator, not NERC perhaps, but for a smaller settlement, smaller community, it should be the tariff setter, and those tariffs should not depend on the political situation, be it pre-election or post-election time. And the second issue that has already been raised, it's overlay regulation of license terms. Today, you can come to our profitable utility company and actually prosecute them for failure to comply with the license terms. They do not have the required number of personnel in that company, but they don't need this many people working for them. So those licensing terms are totally irrational, and they actually preclude utility companies from getting formed, from getting operational and making profit. But there is one thing where I disagree with Andri Kavun. The community should not and cannot actually treat the issues of sanitation. We cannot establish the sanitation system that will be worth 400 million hryvnias. It's for annual budgets for our community. So there should be some national program and some mechanisms of repayable financial assistance. So long, inexpensive loans, for example, under the guarantees of local council that owns utility company. So, for example, a street with 3 breaks of the pipe actually will be more beneficial to us in terms of bringing repair teams or crews rather than establish the sanitation system. With reforms of the sanitation systems, the utilities companies should become profitable faster. Another issue that I would like to raise, which is extremely acute, I believe, particularly in our community. As matters stand, local authorities and large enterprises in the sphere of water supply and sanitation that are major contaminators or polluters are not held responsible for the pollution and contamination of the environment. We had a problem with the city of Dnipro. We border on the city of Dnipro. There, where the canal discharges untreated wastewater directly into the river. Which runs through our village or through our community, and they do that 24/7 with chemical contaminants, etc. So the same pertains to the pre-treatment station in the city of Dnipro. Every other night, they discharge an untreated wastewater. And we suffer from the odor, from the quality of water. And every inspection actually entails fines of 100 to 300 hryvnias. That is it. Neither the local authorities or municipal authorities nor the city Vodokanal seems to be responsible for that. It's a huge problem that we have so far failed to address. Have we still got a representative from the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources with us? Andriy? Vladimir Bilakin, do we have Vladimir Bilakin with us? No, thank you very much that you've responded to my remarks. We don't say that the community should install those systems on their own, but they should initiate the installation. Nobody can impose it on you unless your community shows interest and finds some support. Then the money will be be allocated at the regional and national levels. So give us the mechanisms. Yes, we have to develop such mechanisms yet. The situation is fairly complicated. We are often accused of poor work, of being inactive, and they say that the legislation is wrong, regulations are wrong, and each business entity assess, or local authorities will assess it from their own perspective without seeing the entire picture. Now we've proposed the draft strategy and we started to discuss it, but we can't see the common position from various water canals. So because they tend to see one and the same issue differently. But once the ministry comes up with a proposed solution, we face this huge wave of criticism. It's not about criticizing, it's about the capacity of local communities. We want to live in clean communities. We live there, our children live there. But we need mechanisms like long-term, inexpensive loans, access to infrastructures, access to certain national projects by local communities. So we are constrained within the situation of lack of terms for the installing of sanitation facilities, sanitation infrastructures. Once you create conditions, then you can ask us why we do not develop water sewage or sanitation facilities. Yeah. Thank you very much. Shall we give the floor to Mr. Bilakon? You could have heard from Andriy about their their complaints.
Як ви можете відреагувати на це? Що з цим робити? Невже неможливо ніяк вирішити питання?
What can we do about it? So this issue should be studied in greater detail. What discharges take place from the local water treatment facilities. And if you say that the only punishment is 150 hryvnias of fine, those fines should be established with due regard of the damage to the environment caused by those discharges. I haven't studied this situation. I can't provide any comments here. But you should go to the state environmental inspection and insist that they monitor the situation and they sample the water there and see whether there is contamination, and use not only the fines but also the damage. Calculate the damage. I am not prepared to comment on this in detail. Just as Vyacheslav said, most of the participants of this dialogue are traveling to Novo-Alexandrivka community to learn about your best practices in water supply. I don't know why I wasn't invited, but we will discuss it a bit later. Now we have with us Mykola Timchenko from Tlumach Connect Service Utilities Company. Mykola, you've got your own experience of setting up the territorial community in Tlumach, and you now have this utility company. It took some time for the community to take on responsibility for the utilities company. You had to restructure it and to practically start from scratch. Now this utility company is in charge of water supply and sanitation services. So what's your recipe for other communities how to improve the situation? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. It's my pleasure to participate in this important and very useful dialogue. I heard about some very interesting best practices for which I'm thankful. Our utility company has been in place for a year now. And we inherited, quote unquote, all the fixed assets from the previous company. The property, including fixed assets, are very conventionally or can very conventionally be tagged as such fixed assets. We had huge water losses in the pipes, up to 70%. We had very poorly operating treatment facilities. We've managed to improve the situation partially thanks to the DESPRO project with accounting of water, water metering, with the treatment of water, again, thanks to cooperation with DESPRO. But the situation is still fairly challenging. It is better controlled today than it used to be, but still we struggle to work properly for various reasons. One of them being a huge tax load that we have to cope with. VAT is very high, and smaller water canals like us should either be payers of single tax, which is simpler to administer, or reduce the VAT rate. And perhaps at the national level, the issue should be raised about reducing electricity price for such water canals. Thanks to DESPRO, we've got the new system of international accounting standards of electricity metering for water supplies. And out of 300,000 per month, we now are capable of saving some money. And the economies are fairly complex. Because the water tank is 25 kilometers away from the city to which we supply water. So the cost of electricity supply and electricity supply itself are very expensive. The pipes are very old. They are more than 50 years old, and they are leaking all the time, hence the water losses. Have you got a clear plan in the territorial community of addressing the issues that you've enumerated so far? We are a newly established company, right? We've been in place for a year, as I said. We've got our vision, we've developed a plan, and now after the elections, we've got the new authorities and management in the community. So the people invited a new mayor of the community. So he is now learning about the situation as it is. And we are establishing a dialogue to improve cooperation. We do not get any subsidies. We've worked for a year we're relying only on our own resources. And we address some of the breakages that we inherited from the previous the company. But I'm not sure that we will be able to live without or operate without subsidies in the next year. Now, electricity is getting more expensive. Then minimum wages are increasing, which means that we will have to raise our salaries as well. 40% of the tariff goes to pay salaries, and only 60% can go to develop the enterprise. So we haven't discussed that with the new community mayor. We don't know how to address these new challenges. We have several scenarios in front of us, and we are thinking now of how to address the tariff issue. Thank you very much, Mykola. I would like to ask Andriy Pinchuk to invite representatives of Tlumach Common Service to your community to learn from your experience. And Mr. Kuhn actually spoke about the issue I wanted to raise as well. And I'm sure, and I agree with him, that Vodafone should be managed by private investors. I worked for a long time in energy generation and energy supply companies. And I know that those Oblenergo, where private investors started to operate earlier, were much more successful. So I think that at the national level, this issue should also be addressed. because it is the future of developing the water sector. Thank you very much. We spoke about decentralization of water supply services. Some time ago, it was the rayon that was in charge of water supply. Now is the territorial community. But Ivan Belbas, for example, believes that it's not always reasonable to apply decentralization in water supply sector. Ivan, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, colleagues. Now we are speaking about the transfer of the network operator to local and territorial communities. For example, where rayon councils and their utility companies were in charge. As a result of the decentralization reforms, 3 communities were formed. And now the question is how to ensure centralized or piped water supply to each of them. No, and they all have the same source of piped water supply. The issue is to actually maintain the quality of water supply at the previous level for it not to deteriorate. And in addition, to try to avoid increased costs of such services. In the previous 5 years, we optimized a number of processes, installed the dispatching system and management system dashboards. And we see the way out of the situation in inter-municipal cooperation, so that 3 territorial communities should sign contracts about or MOUs about the water supply and sanitation. So now there are certain administrative costs, and the tariffs in smaller settlements will always be higher than in larger settlements. To avoid this problem, we can see an opportunity to have one utilities company for 3 communities, so that it supplies or it provides services to all 3 of them. Another issue, sorry.
Пане Іване,
Слышно. Ничего не слышно.
He's muted himself. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes, yes, we can. Another problem yet to be addressed because of this separation of communities. Something's got wrong with connection to Ivan Belbas. We think we will do that a bit later. So, and I will give the floor to Veniamin Sitov, his head or mayor of Merevyanska territorial community, and he's member of the board of the Association of Amalgamated Territorial Communities. The association has brought together many communities, and it would be interesting for us to hear from him how the association sees the solution of these issues. Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear participants. I would say I agree with the representatives of the utilities company who share their issues and challenges, and representatives of the territorial communities. We are on the ground. We witness all of those issues. We suffer because of them, and we can come up with certain viable solutions just for the sake of safety and security of our community residents. All of you are residents of some community, and we have to be responsible in addressing those issues. And for the representatives of the ministries, I would like to say that we still lack initiatives, initiators, or the driving forces of those reforms. We hear the statement of certain problems. We hear about issues and lack of funding, but the ministries do not seem to be ready to offer proper solutions. And our anchor or moderator has asked whether you are prepared to sit together, to get locked up and find solutions. But your response was not very clear. We see that there is no political will on the part of the responsible concerned ministries. Now, locally, we use the infrastructure of water supply and sanitation that we inherited from the Soviet times. Some of the communities have been luckier to cooperate with the DESPRO project and benefit from this cooperation. But most of us still have the Soviet time infrastructure, which is dysfunctional, which is dilapidated, which is obsolete, which is leaking. And 70 to 90% of communities have infrastructures that leak water or discharge wastewater into rivers. And the controlling bodies just are looking for every opportunity to punish the communities for certain weaknesses or violations of their requirements, because it's about $1 million worth fines. So this is the so-called environmental money, which does not go to the communities. Specialized environmental funds, just they were available only to some communities, and those funds were deposited and allowed communities to develop economically and environmentally. We in our community, thanks to the DESPRO project, visited Poland with Vyacheslav, with Andrei, with some other participants of today's event. And we could see that Poland has established a governmental fund, environmental fund, the founders of which are the government with some ministries and private companies. And this fund is used to develop the environmental facilities. They loan on minimum interest rate for the projects that are environmentally friendly, and they also provide grants to communities. We should learn from that best practice. But ministries seem reluctant to do so. And we have questions in the association and in the territorial communities because the facilities, the networks that we have available are very old. You know that. There's no actually wear-and-tear resource. And I would say that we should be transferring from the dialogue to systemic action. We should set up locally the funds for decentralization. We have powers locally as part of the decentralization reform, but we haven't got the necessary resources to implement those powers, to exercise those powers. We locally haven't got more incomes. Our incomes are decreasing rather than increasing. And for the environmental systems, for water supplies and sanitation systems to work effectively, we need resources. The environmental tax should be retained locally. At least a larger percentage of that tax should be retained locally, so that we develop certain administrative measures to apply to the polluters, for example, without engaging courts or the Ministry of Justice. These would be targeted funds to develop the environmental capacity of the communities. It's broader than just water supply and sanitation, and can be also waste management. It's a comprehensive, environmentally friendly activity. We should also have certain national funds based on international best practices. And we should apply those practices in this country. But that requires political will on the part of the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, Ministry for Development of Communities and Territories. So, once this is in place, we on the ground in the communities will be most willing to implement projects. Now we also have Maria Zonova from Vinnytsia Oblast State Administration. She is in charge of developing territories and communities. So it would be interesting to hear from you about the legislative framework, whether it is sufficient for you to be useful for to the local communities. Good afternoon, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I am glad to see all of you, those who I know, and I have a similar question why I wasn't invited to visit the Novoalexandrivska community. So in Vinnytsia Oblast, we have a difficulty with the drinking water national program as well. It hasn't been funded since 2014. So it is not systemically funded, and we locally or regionally do not have the resources to finance it on our own. Now we have several projects that are implementable, but the worth of those projects is 1 billion hryvnias. We do not have the budget for those projects. Now we developed a new program with the ministry, and we will be implementing it at the oblast level. Today, we've got the so-called lending of the oblast budget to implement the activities under the drinking water program. When we understood that there will be no resources from that program at the national level, we worked with the fund of supporting construction and development. The founder of this fund is a local council. It provided some funds for construction, but then they introduced certain amendments to the statute, and they also started lending utilities companies that volunteer to participate in the drinking water program activities. It is a flat loan or soft loan. For 3 years, you've got a flat tax of 4%. There is the utility company that wants to improve water supply services. Then, together with local government, they submit a proposal to the Oblast state administration for participating in the Oblast program. In this competition or competitive selection, there is a commission, selection commission, that actually uses the resources very reasonably and very cautiously. They conduct the competition for the projects, and they select winners and start funding from the next year. So they fund the project to be implemented locally at the community level. So we described very thoroughly the funding procedure, the selection procedure, the application procedure, or the set of the documents to be submitted as part of the application. And it has worked for 4 years now. This competition is fairly popular amongst territorial communities. Sometimes communities are anxious lest they should be able to repay the loan, but now they can see that any funds can be used to repay the loan. It can be a part of the tariff for the new services that will be thus collected, or the participation can, the residents can participate in the initiative just to settle this loan. There are lots of options. Of course, there are certain risks linked to loan as any other, the default risk, but local authorities, local self-governments guarantee the repayment of this loan to their utilities companies. So there were several cases when those loans were not repaid, but the judicial authorities worked very effectively here. I know that we are unique in applying this format of cooperation with territorial communities, and we are planning to invite international audit and international investment, but international cooperation will be difficult in terms of documentation. It should be a trilateral agreement, governmental guarantees, etc. Smaller utilities, communities, particular companies, particularly in rural communities, might have difficulty cooperating within those international projects. Particularly given that the World Bank, for example, will have some threshold requirements, and we believe that our model or our scheme has been fairly useful. We also cooperate with the DESPRO project or program. We started some time ago to improve the water supply facilities. As far as the proposals vented today are concerned, I do agree with the proposal to revise licensing terms. We've got the licensor on water supply and sanitation for entities that are not licensees at the national level of the NERC. 79 licensees got their licenses from other regulators. And I do agree that licensing terms should be revised and simplified and streamlined. Because why would we be setting similar terms to entities with a response with two persons of the on the staff and 2 kilometers of the pipe, and the entity with 50 kilometers of networks and 800 workers. They have different capacities, of course, but the legislation will set similar licensing terms to them. And I agree that if you go to those companies, you will find them for failing to meet the licensing terms. It's true, but smaller companies cannot possibly meet those licensing requirements. So it's our appeal to the Ministry for Developing Communities and Territories and NERC to get those terms simplified. Thank you very much. Maria Zonova from Vinnytsia State Administration. We have been discussing these issues for more than 2 hours. And now I think it's time to make some conclusions. Andrei Kavun. Yeah, we have covered all of the issues. And of course, I agree that we should concert efforts of the local, regional, and national governance level. And we should be thinking of the tools to use in that. And the best tool would be the strategy for the sector. So we need a strategy. And we need an open platform to discuss the very dramatic changes in this sector. I've heard a lot of complaints and recriminations about and grievances about our activities. Thank you very much for your response, but we in the ministry expect that you will also be proactive in the local level. We encourage you to come up with your proposal and we will be responding to them. There is no obstacle for the strategy. There is no obstacle for the cooperation amongst all stakeholders. And there are no obstacles to the dialogue amongst all stakeholders, including international ones. And we are sure that this dialogue will be fruitful. I would like to thank all of our speakers and all of the listeners. It is the end of the beginning of this dialogue. strategy or policy paper of the DESPRO project is on the website. We invite you to read it, to propose amendments and comments, and you can listen to the streamline. You had an opportunity to listen to the streamline, but the streamline is recorded, so you can replay it and read the comments. We received lots of very useful comments. We look forward to hear from you later. On the part of the large team of the DESPRO project, we wish you